With the opening game of the Championship just days away, it's time to lock in our final league predictions. Rather than pick names out of a hat, we're going to be analysing the data to create a model that can give us a prediction on where these teams will finish. Before we start, I just want to give you a quote from a famous statistician, George Box, who once said, "All models are wrong, but some are useful." And that's especially true in football. The game's full of complexities, player form, tactics, injuries, weather, and even sheer luck. So no model can capture everything perfectly, but we can build something useful that highlights the patterns beneath the chaos. In order to get a more accurate insight, we've gone beyond just historic data, and instead opted to look at playstyles for each team to help generate our results. So what exactly are we tracking? And well, the answer is lots of things. Firstly, we'll start with the average player position for each team, and from that we can understand defensive line height and the attacking pressing line height, and the space that is left in between. We're tracking sections of the pitch to see dominance within that area. We're tracking which pass preference they have, short, medium or long, and we can also track the directness and how fast they like to progress up the pitch. We can decipher for each team how they like to pass the ball and how they like to start attacks. Are they cross-dominant or do they like to break lines? We can also see where their strikers like to take shots and where they're most effective. And on the flip side, how the defence performs against shots within those areas. All of this data comes together to give the team an ELO rating, and this can fluctuate dependent on who they're playing and how effective their playstyle is against their opponent. This is determined from prehistoric data and does hold influence over the match predictions. There are thousands of different data points that are assessed versus each opponent. However, to put it in a crude example, if we imagine a team that has a really efficient high press versus a team that has a particularly wobbly defence, the advantage will be with the team with the high press. So whilst each team has its own ELO rating, it all is attributed to individual player stats. So for example, if a star striker leaves a club, then their ELO rating for XG will decrease. And if a new player joins the club who has high XG from a former club, then we can expect that ELO rating for XG to increase. Each team is then formed into just a generic number and then played against each other within a fixture list, not just once, but 10,000 times. And from that we can gain the most likely probability for each match result to create our league table. So that all sounds well and good, however there are a few caveats. Number one being transfers post-simulation. Teams being slow in the market or perhaps not replaced their star striker will be impacted in this simulation. Number two is player stats, in which this model leans on heavily. Now a player may have previously underperformed, however that doesn't represent their future performance. It does also require some manipulation when players transfer from different leagues. Number three is promoted and demoted teams. Now they're not playing at championship level and we need to factor that in for our analysis. Number four is, well, football is hard to predict. There's many outcomes and it can be down to different factors and even luck. Number five is injuries, and this can really impact a team if their star player goes off injured, and this model won't take that into account. And finally is January transfers, and as I mentioned before, this simulation does not take into account any transfers post-simulation, and hence any transfers that are made in January that can really bolster a team, particularly on the lower half, this won't be taken into account. So if you're still here, let's get into it. Coming in at 24 is Sheffield Wednesday. Now I think this will be on a lot of people's lists as well. They're in a terrible position and hopefully they can get out of it. And when we look at the model, it was actually really difficult to include them with so many players leaving and missing data to put in for that. So they have come 24th, and I think that's going to be fairly set in stone. Coming in at 23rd is Oxford United. Now the model didn't really like their transfers in terms of increasing their goal threat. And with goals conceded, they still conceded a lot of goals last season, and will it be enough to keep them up this year? The model doesn't think so. Charlton come in at 22nd, and whilst they've made some impressive signings this season, the model doesn't have them making survival, and it has them struggling to score goals and struggling to adapt to Championship life. Preston come in at 21st, only just making survival, and whilst already being very active in the transfer market, the prediction is they'll still struggle at both ends of the pitch. Number 20, and might surprise a few, is Wrexham. Now they have made some impressive signings, however the model doesn't think they can integrate and perform at a higher level. That said, it's taken into account a lot of their playstyles from the previous year, which we can probably expect will change with a higher calibre of player. So perhaps this isn't quite representative, however this is what the model is saying. Number 19 is Hull. Again, some additions to the team, however the model doesn't have them really improving from last season and still going to be struggling in that bottom half. Number 18 is Queen's Park Rangers, and again I was a little bit surprised at this one with some additions to their attacking line. I thought they might be quite an energetic team and actually quite a high scoring team. However, the model doesn't have it down by that and sets them in 18th position. Coming in at 17th is a very steady Portsmouth. The signings seem to integrate and perform reasonably well for the bottom half table. I'm sure Portsmouth fans would like to see a little bit higher up there, but that is what the model has predicted. Coming in at 16th is Blackburn. Again, may surprise a few of you. However, they have lost a lot of their quality players. Now, there is a lot of time in the transfer market. Will they replace them? But at this current moment in time, the model has you sitting at 16th. Stoke come in at 15th. Now, they have been quite active in the transfer market and a little bit of an upgrade from last season. I'm sure Stoke fans would like to see you higher. However, the model has you at 15th. Coming in at 14th is Watford. Not much to say on this one. They seem to perform reasonably well, both at the top of the pitch and in defence. However, in such a competitive championship season, they're sat in 14th. Again, slightly surprising to see Bristol in 13th after their great performance last season. However, the model just doesn't fancy them. They don't have them performing well in front of goal and defensively leaking a few too many. 12th is West Brom, and again, the model didn't really fancy any of the transfers that have been made. Has them down as struggling a little bit, but secures 12th position. 11th is Middlesbrough, and again, I was a bit shocked by this one. I had them higher up in my own head. However, the model has them at 11th. Millwall come in at 10th, and again, I was a little bit surprised with this one. They finished the season so strongly last year, and I've seen a few good additions to their squad. However, the model seems to have them at 10th. Swansea with a big jump up to 9th after a strong finish to last year, and they've made some really good signings as well with the upcoming season. So we'll look to see how they perform. The model has them at 9th. Derby at 8th. Again, a really good finish to them last year, securing survival. They've made some really unique signings and really an indication perhaps well suited to John Eustace and the playstyle he wants. So really interested to see how they perform this year. Coming in at 7th is Birmingham. Now, I know a lot of people will be surprised by this one, as I know in a lot of people's predictions they have them 1st, 2nd, 3rd. And certainly making top 6. However, the model just doesn't fancy them. They made a lot of additions to the squad. Can they all click? And the model just doesn't think so, and it doesn't think that they'll be able to bring the same level of performance that perhaps they're expecting. Big questions for them, but that has you in 7th. Now, as we move into the top 6, 6th position is secured by Coventry, which is a slightly worse performance, having finished 5th the previous year. However, being such a competitive year this year, I think that's actually a pretty good result. Now, there's not been a lot of signings for Coventry. However, the players that have come in have added quality, and we need to remember that last season, the players actually had some great stats throughout the season. Coming in at 5th is Sheffield United. Again, some people may have had these higher up the list. However, the model has them not scoring as many goals and, well, conceding a few more. Coming in at 4th is Norwich, and again, I was a little bit surprised by this, considering they've had the departure of, well, their star striker. However, the model seems to appreciate their game style and believes that the players that they brought in are the right kind of players for their model. 3rd is Leicester. Now, the model actually did predict Leicester to top the league. However, I have deployed a 12-point deduction on that, so it puts them in 3rd position, has them really strong performers, the best team in the league really to play against. So 3rd position for them with that points deduction, and that's how it's going to go. And in 2nd position we have Southampton. Now, again, a really strong team. We know that coming down from the Premier League. They've made some really strong additions as well and retained a lot of their quality. Also, we expect them to play slightly different than I have in the model. However, the model still has them performing in that 2nd position. Now, in 1st position, we have Ipswich. Now, it might not have come as a surprise. A Premier League team coming down and holding a lot of their high-quality talent. So, it's got them in 1st position. The play style, these are going to be one of the most dominant teams in the league. However, we shall see. And so there we have it. There is the entire league. You tell me, are you happy with where your team finished? I'm a Coventry fan, and I'm fairly pleased with where we are in that 6th position. I think it's going to be a really competitive league. We'll see how we get on. This model isn't perfect, and no model ever is, but hopefully it does a good job in reflecting it, and perhaps we'll come back at this at the end of the season to review how we got on. It was certainly a challenge to build, but thank you for watching, and if you want to see more on football analytics or models, how this works, hit the like and subscribe.